Good morning. My name is Romjue, and I'm here to talk about the choosing of traits you wish your child to have before it's born, otherwise known as designer babies. Imagine living in a world where you can be able to choose how tall you want your child to be, or hair color, even how athletic they are. That day may be a lot closer than you think. Genetic engineers are able to choose the traits you ask for just as if you were buying a new car or house. Now, as to everything in life, there are pros and cons about designer babies. Being able to take out the genes you wish or to add them may not always be about the looks of your child. Let's say you or your partner has a genetic disease that has a high possibility of being passed on to your offspring. An article and study conducted by Samuel D. Hensley, a surgical pathologist at the Department of Anatomic Pathology at the Mississippi Baptist Medical Center, wrote an article after his study that showed that with being able to choose what genes you want and don't want, you can take out the gene that carries this disease. This process is called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, or PGD. However, that is a positive way to use this ability. Other religious and ethical reasons on the matter may argue against the use of this technique. Some religious views may say that God is in charge of life and the creation of it, but let's take a look at the ethical factors of the matter. Should people be able to choose the traits they wish their child to have? Isn't the surprise exciting? When people have a child, it is fun to compare what traits came from what parent. But with the ability to alter those genes, this excitement of the unknown goes away. You can even have the choice to alter genes so much to the point that your child doesn't even look like it's your own. I could have a very tall child and being very short that would not look natural if I'm not even 5 foot and my child is like 7'5". So here we have some photos from National Geographic of what the average American will look like in 2050. Now, some may think that this is normal because it's a whole new generation, but if you take time to compare this to what people look like now, it's a big difference. Studies have proven that although recessive genes may show up in a child over dominant genes, being African American and having red hair and freckles is very uncommon. But in the future, it will become more common, like you see in this picture here, because we have the choice of what genes we want our children to have, and that will be more possible in the future. An early case of PGD was conducted just in 1996 in Virginia State by Monique and Scott Collins. Because they had already had 2 boys, they wanted a girl to be their 3rd child. Now we all know that technology wasn't as advanced as it is now, but even 17 years ago, we were still able to choose the sex of our child. This story made an impacting article in Times Magazine in 1999 and raised the question on what can we do with this ability. This was what initially started the phenomenon of designer babies, but even in 1994, the Council on Ethical and Judicial Affairs made a statement that year that the practice of pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is only acceptable if used to prevent a specific disease. It is not ethical to be used to have more socially acceptable physical traits. George Annis, chair of Department of Health Law, Bioethics and Human Rights at Harvard University, believes and supports in the idea of PGD, but thinks that this should come with many regulations to go along with it. Many of you are probably wondering how much money would any of this cost. So let us look at the economic factors of designer babies. Just choosing gender alone can cost $19,000. People from all over the world, such as India, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Thailand, Japan, Germany, Britain, and Canada, have come to America in order to have this procedure be possible for them. Now, why would someone spend $19,000 just to be able to choose what sex they want their child to be? The answer to that isn't certain. Now, the expense of this could tie back to the ethical side. What if people want to use PGD but can't afford it? You can take out loans or try and figure out another source of money, but other than that, it's either you can afford it or you can't. Some people may think that that is unfair and unethical, but having a child you were meant to have instead of choosing what gender you would like, or what traits you think are better than others, is a lot better choice than you think, because people aren't meant to be perfect. Now we can look at the science and technology on pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. PGD is possible with a combination of genetic engineering and in vitro fertilization. The in vitro fertilization part is taking the sperm and eggs and combining them in a laboratory dish. Then using PGD, the embryos are screened, then transferred back into the uterus, and the genes that you have wanted have been selected. Also when using PGD, the embryos go through a chromosomal screening to make sure that the genetics are successful and are ready to be implanted back into the womb. This technology isn't always safe, of course. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine issued a statement stating PGD appears to be a viable alternative to post-contraceptive diagnosis and pregnancy termination, acknowledging the possibility of diagnostic errors and unknown long-term consequences on the fetus. The American Society for Reproductive Medicine had also made a statement stating that they were against the use of PGD for the selection of sex and advised people to be cautious about it for the reason that it could lead to serious sex-linked diseases. Another downside of PGD is that during this process, they are only able to take out 1 to 2 cells at a time, and so this can make it very difficult to determine whether there are any abnormalities that you would even need to worry about being taken out. Also, something that should be taken into consideration about using pre-implantation genetic diagnosis is that after going through this process of taking out eggs and going through tests, only about 20% of this is actually successful and results in a successful pregnancy. This means that only 2 in every 10 people get their money's worth by doing this procedure. This would and should concern people for the reason that you are going to spend thousands of dollars to make sure that your child isn't born with an illness, or if you wanted a specific gender, wouldn't you want your odds to be higher? Now we can look at the political side of the matter. In fact, not everyone is in favor of designer babies. Actually, the United Kingdom has made being able to use pre-implantation genetic diagnosis illegal for the reason that it is regarded unethical. Another article by Samuel D. Hensley stated that it is illegal for the reason because of this question: should people be created specifically to save another person's life, or should a child be welcomed and loved unconditionally regardless of his or her instrumental value in helping someone? Also, Immanuel Kant, the prominent philosopher of rationalism, felt that it should be illegal for the reason that human beings should always be treated as ends of themselves and not as means for another person or to attain his or her needs. So this brings us back to whether PGD is ethical and should ever be allowed. Based on my research and the fact that people have abused it to have specific gender or physical traits, no. This concept should never be taken advantage of for someone's personal preference on the perfect child. If it was ever to be used, it should be used simply for the prevention of a genetic disease. Thank you.
So, Allie, you covered 4 lenses in your presentation. Before you started, had you thought of any of those lenses? And then, as you went through your research, which lens did you find to be the most compelling?
Can you repeat the last part?
Sure. So you covered 4.
Yes.
Okay. When you get to the end of this question, I want you to answer which one of those, from a research standpoint, did you find to be most compelling, getting
knowing that ethical was definitely going to be one of the big ones because well, even in the end that helped make my judgment because after all the lenses that I looked at, it tied back to the ethical side. So like the political standpoint in the United Kingdom, that was based on whether it's ethically right and acceptable. What else was it? Oh, the economic factors. Like if people can't afford it, should it be allowed that other people are able to use it when other people don't have the resources and money to use it? So ethical was definitely a big one because it tied back to all the other lenses that I looked at.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So if you had to argue the opposite position, what would be the strongest piece of evidence in your research, and how would you go about making an argument for the other side?
Probably the fact that if, like, let's say you have a genetic disease and it has a high possibility of being passed down, you can go in and you can take out the genes so that your child doesn't have to suffer through it, I guess. So, yeah, that would definitely be, like, a good enough reason to use this.